Hello, Serie A fan.
Milan deliver the goods in the capital, come unstuck versus Udinese's San Zlatan, who's busy in Sanremo, headlining a festival. Other headlines include Inter on top and flying, Roma can't build a freaking stadium, and Juve prepare for Lazio. All this plus your questions in this episode of Scudetto.
Hello, Serie A fan, and welcome to Scudetto, your weekly roundup of top-flight Italian football. So we've got plenty to get through tonight, as we've had an entire 2 rounds of games since we last recorded. Although just before we get started, we wanted to join all the clubs in Serie A in paying tribute to Davide's story 3 years since his tragic death. So lovely to see him projected on screens at stadiums around Italy. So without further ado, let's introduce the panel. Kenny, how are you getting on this week?
Yeah, not too bad, considering I had a milestone birthday. I won't reveal which one it was, but yeah, it's been good. It's been good. We got some food in, so that was nice. Other than that, still in lockdown, but looking forward to things easing up, hopefully in the weeks or months ahead.
Congratulations on the half century.
Not that one.
Any news on the beer front? What's new there?
I have got a Stewart Brewing Mosaic Citra Hopped Session IPA. So it's I've actually already opened it, and I can confirm that it is very nice. It is, as the name suggests, quite citrusy. Not too strong this week, but obviously had my birthday session a couple of days ago, so just taking it easy at the moment.
It's got a lovely lime-coloured can, so hopefully a nice lime flavour. Good stuff. Boaz, how about you? Is there any news on the beer saga?
It's interesting that you ask. You may remember that I ordered these beers in January. Well, I decided to go to the physical location where I bought the beers, and it turns out this business has gone out of business in October, and they just haven't switched their website off. And they're still accepting, you can still order right today, right this moment, but they will never send these beers out. There's no one there. It's quite crazy.
I mean, that is a definite dishonourable. I mean, can we name them? Or
I'd rather not name and shame them in case they send their hard man over. They have my address, remember? But but it was quite disappointing to find out that I'm never going to see these beers that I carefully picked out.
Yeah, I mean, our listeners are going to be distraught.
Yeah, but at least the saga ends.
Yeah, that's true. You need to find a different solution, though. I mean, I say that having drunk the same beer several times and even missed some weeks, but yeah. And other than the beer saga, how have you been getting on this week? Anything to report? You haven't been vaccinated again, presumably.
I have not been vaccinated again, but due to my day job, I've been watching Sanremo Festival every night, and let's say it's been very interesting.
Oh, good. We've got some questions about that, so be coming to you on those. Yeah, on my side, I've got a Stadin. I'm not actually sure how you pronounce it. It's a Helsinki brewery, Stadin, and it's an American pale ale. Yeah, it's good. It's quite kind of standard Finnish American pale ale, which all the breweries seem to do, but enjoying it so far. Enough of that. Let's talk about football. We're starting with Milan this week. The Scudetto derby last week. Obviously, Milan came out on top in a big game against Roma, but since then, dropped points to Udinese, giving up ground in the title race.
Yeah, it was a week of two faces from Milan. Initially, there was an outstanding performance against Roma. The score didn't really tell the story of the game because Milan dominated in several passages and could possibly have been 3-0 up by the first half. As it was, there were a few refereeing controversies in the game that probably tainted the social media narrative. But overall, as I said, Milan were very deserving of the victory at the Olimpico. They pressured Roma. Roma were losing a lot of balls in front of the defense. And as I said, Zlatan missed an open goal with exuberant back heel. And there was a couple of other pretty easy misses. Rebic set up Zlatan in an offside position when any other day of the week he'd be taking a shot, as he proved later in the game when he actually did pull the trigger and scored a very, very good goal. As I said, the Roma performance was a breath of fresh air. It was back to the Milan that we knew from 2020. A lot of attacking play, a lot of runners getting in behind the lines. Another penalty, of course. And then it all came back, crashing back down to earth with yesterday's performance against Udinese at San Siro, which is a game that Milan, by all accounts, were expected to win. But Udinese arrived in Milan with their bus and decided to park it in front of the goal. And they did what their game plan was executed excellently. And to be honest, Milan couldn't really find many solutions. There was possibly a penalty shout against on a foul on Kessie in the first half, and this is where I should probably raise this, that now that Milan are getting all these penalties, that I mean, if you check the penalties, all but bar 2 are pretty standard penalties. But in any case, now that Milan are getting these penalties, there's a feeling that some calls that would usually go to their side are not going in their direction. So there was one of these penalty calls in the Roma game, which even Roma fan Marco on the Milan Obsession podcast this week, he thought that might be a foul. And again, as I said, in the Udinese game, there was quite a hard pull down on Kessie that wasn't given, but all was good because in the 96th minute, for no apparent reason, the Udinese defender rose up and handballed it in a very volleyball style. And so once again, Milan got a penalty and a draw.
Yeah, I can't argue with much of what you've said. Obviously, as a plastic Roma fan, I was a little bit disappointed, but obviously happy to see my boy Anton Rebic back on the score sheet. In terms of the penalty in that game, we were talking about it, weren't we, Kenny? The comical reaction of Fazio. Not sure what he was playing out there, really.
Yeah, I mean, straight off the bat, he probably deserves a dishonourable for getting himself booked. I don't really know what the complaints can possibly be with the penalty. You see in VAR, it's very clear that it's a stamp. He stands on the player's foot. But I can understand in the heat of the moment protesting to the referee, but the referee gets called back by VAR. The referee correctly, I mean, there's no debate about it, awards the penalty. And Fazio goes over to him after there's been this period of reflection, goes over to him and ironically applauds him and picks up a booking in the first half as one of your centre backs to do that. Ended up getting subbed off in the second half, but just mindless, really. I don't get it.
And this touches on the point I mentioned before. For me, if the Fazio foul is given as a penalty, it should also come with a yellow card because he injures the player. If he didn't get that yellow card, so he allows himself to ironically applaud the referee, which in any case, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but in Italy in the past, players have been given straight red cards for this. So he's walking a fine line and he's being a bit silly, but he got away with it, I guess.
Yeah, as I was saying, he's starting to look a lot more like the Fazio that we came to know during his spell at Tottenham, but probably enough about that. In terms of positives for Roma, I mean, the Vertu goal was pretty tasty, wasn't it, Bert?
Fantastic, and Vertu is the first French player in Serie A since Platini, I believe, to reach 10 goals, and he's the first midfielder, if you don't consider that Platini as a striker. But in any case, fantastic play. It has to be said that Tomori, who by all accounts had a really good game against Roma, his clearance is quite a weak clearance, and it sets up Roma's move. But now that I mentioned Tomori, another big narrative point in the Milan-Roma game was the fact that Pioli decided to drop his captain, Romagnoli, which kind of raised a bit of a stir in social media. He'd been taking a lot of the flack for Milan's recent performances, even though in my mind, he was kind of a scapegoat because, yes, he didn't play too well. And in fact, to be honest, I also kind of singled him out a few weeks ago. But the defense as a whole has not been performing at its best. So to single him out is a little bit rich. And also considering he's played with 4 or 5 different center backs this whole season. So not exactly a very stable pair right now.
Yeah. But I did feel that he was very, very exposed against Lukaku's pace. I mean, that was Milan's undoing in that game. So perhaps maybe it was to protect him as much as anything, leaving him out, taking him out of the spotlight.
He probably needed rest, and he was back in the squad in the Udinese game, and he contributed with a amazing goal line clearance, which looked amazing with all the replays. But possibly the Udinese striker should have done a little bit better with his header and put it either side of Romagnoli. In any case, he didn't play too badly in the Udinese game, and he's certainly not at fault for the lack of bite up front from the likes of Rebic and Leao, who both seem to be on a really off day. And Hakan is still recovering from COVID, and as opposed to a lot of other players, he's actually had active COVID, so he's suffering the repercussions, and I guess it's going to take him a while. That's kind of like Dybala, who we haven't seen for a while. I think it's a whole different game for a professional when it hits you properly.
Yeah. So Milan go away to Verona on Sunday evening. I think they'll still be without Zlatan, will they? We'll come back to the whole Sanremo festival in a bit, but he will still be absent for that game.
I think he's still out injured, which kind of works out great for him.
And due to miss the Man United game as well, I understand.
Oh, really? That's box office. I'm surprised he's not going to be making.
Well, he might make one of his miraculous recoveries, but the last I read yesterday, or it might have been the day before, was that he was expected to miss that game. So that'll be a big miss for all football fans.
Okay, so briefly on Roma, I mean, they've kind of had the opposite week to Milan. Obviously, the disappointment in their clash with them, but then bounced back with victory over Fiorentina. Wanted to kind of highlight Spinazzola's performance, obviously getting on the score sheet at both ends, which is never ideal as a defender, but I thought he had a really good game, and the goal he scored was pretty spectacular volley for a right back. I think he's quietly been one of their most valuable players this season in that position.
And I think the own goal was quite a spectacular volley as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I mean, it rifled into the roof of the net. I don't know that
and being harsh.
He didn't know much about it, did he? But while we're on Roma, we need to talk about the plans for that freaking stadium, which have been abandoned.
Yeah, I mean, it's not great for Italian football, but I think they took this opportunity to kind of reassess based on their statement the fact that the stadium was planned in a pre-COVID era, and that with finances the way they are at the moment, it probably wasn't really a project that could be realized. But at the same time, they've said that they're going to explore various sites for the new stadium, including, I believe, also continuing with the option of a stadium at Tor di Valle. But they've kind of taken a swipe at the mayor of Rome, basically saying, you know, they can't have the resistance to it that they've had before. So basically saying the stadium project wasn't viable, but we should have been allowed to build it. So, but I do totally agree with the sentiment that too much red tape. Let them get on and let Italian football get on and catch up with the other top leagues in Europe, really, on that front. Because to me, that's all that's missing. We've got all the drama. We've got some real quality in Serie A. We've had, up until recently, one of the most exciting title races in Europe. All that's missing, I guess, is that last ingredient to enable them to really compete financially again and to hopefully become the best league in the world again.
Yeah, but it's just written in the chat, frogs, which was obviously one of the initial stumbling blocks for the stadium construction. Was it they found an endangered species of frog?
We could do a whole episode about reasons why certain stadiums in Italy, including Roma and Fiorentina and a few others, are not getting rebuilt. And don't get me started about the stadium in Bari. It's ridiculous, and frogs was one of the reasons for one of the projects not getting built. So what a country.
Yeah. So Kenny, you mentioned that maybe the title race is starting to fizzle out a little bit. The reason that we haven't spoken about Inter, who are top of the table until now, is because they've been playing against Parma tonight. We wanted to give you a little bit of a live reaction. They've won that game 2-1. So extended their lead at the top of the table to
6 points.
What is it now? 6 points. It's starting to look like the title race is over, isn't it, Kenny?
It could get that way soon. to be honest, without wanting to preempt, I guess, what we're going to speak about next, I think the last hope really for a title race is the upcoming game against Atalanta on Monday night. It's difficult to see if Inter take 3 points from that, where they're gonna drop those points, considering that Milan and Juve are both still involved in Europe. So yes, potentially. I think one thing to highlight is that this isn't. It's not really a case of it fizzling out. This is a case of Inter absolutely hitting an incredible run of form, finding their strongest 11, and doing all of that at the exact right time of the season. What we were 20, 23, 24 games in. So yeah, the next few weeks are going to go a long way to determining whether we're going to have a title fight or not. But that Inter side is looking very, very settled. And I think I mentioned either last week or the previous week on the pod that you look at that starting 11, and I can now see that is the strongest. That is the strongest starting 11 in Serie A. We're starting to see that. And also with just these games coming thick and fast, that's the time where having that settled squad, having that settled system is probably going to bear fruit.
Yeah, Boaz, I know you'll be loath to admit this, but they have looked particularly strong, especially in the last couple of games, haven't they? Just really getting it done in these games against the sort of teams in the lower down, that are a bit lower down the table.
Their record since getting knocked out of the Champions League has been formidable. They've been on a mad march. As Kenny said, Conte is settled on his first 11, and he's also putting all his eggs into this Scudetto basket. For example, in the match in Parma today, he played 3 players who were already on a yellow. He said in his press conference, look, why would I start making calculations now? I've got the squad that I believe in, and if these guys get booked, I'll have someone else who can play in the role. And I think as much as we've criticized Conte over this season, I think that's a really winning mentality. And ultimately, the result at Parma today, with Alexis Sanchez scoring 2 in the space of 7 minutes in the second half, pretty much justifies his decisions.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, they play Atalanta, probably the game of the weekend, although it's actually on a Monday night. What do we think of Atalanta's chances here, Kenny? Obviously, we've mentioned the amazing form that Inter in, but Atalanta have been in pretty good run of form themselves. Is it 4 wins from the last 5, and obviously the 5-1?
Yeah. So in Serie A, 4 wins in a row. Actually, I mean, we can say 4 in the last 5 if we include that Real Madrid game. Yes, they're looking really, really good. One of the bright sparks in the last couple of games seems to be the re-emergence of Ilicic as well. I have to admit, I really, really feared for him when he for his future at Atalanta, when he was on the bench in that game against Real Madrid, looking absolutely miserable. Came on, and there were reports that Gasperini had given him an absolute mouthful when he turned around and complained about a decision and said, instead of complaining, why don't you try and find something to do? And then was duly substituted off again after having been brought on. But as the last couple of games, really, he's contributed immensely, and having an on form Ilicic means having one of the best players in the league on form. Really add to that the fact that Pessina really seems to have kind of taken on that mantle left by Gomez. I think it was the Atalanta news account was, or it might have been one of the other Atalanta fan accounts, was tweeting today that just the stats of Pessina in his last games, and you look at the amount of ground that he covers, which I think is a lot of what people talked about with Gomez, with his tuttocampista role. The amount of ground that he covers, he covered more ground than anyone else in, I think, the last 8 or 9 matches on the pitch, except for that last game against Crotone, where he was second, but covered more ground than any other Atalanta player. So they're really beginning to click. It's not unusual for Atalanta to click at this time of the season. I think this is where Gasperini's real focus on fitness that appears to have come in previous years as well. So yes, a lot is resting on this game, and we talk about the race for the Scudetto, but let's not forget that Atalanta are still chasing that Champions League spot. They're looking good for it at the moment. The results went well for them this weekend. This midweek and this weekend, actually. So there's a lot to play for Atalanta. They won't be going into this match with sort of an eye on Real or anything. It should be an absolute cracker. It should be the game of the weekend, as you said.
Absolutely. And speaking of that sort of race for the Champions League spaces, they'll obviously be up against Milan and Roma, who we've already spoken about, but also Juventus, who seem to be hitting kind of rich vein of form. Obviously, most recently, 3-0 win against Spezia. And Boaz, we were discussing this beforehand, but actually compared to Juventus sides at similar stages in the season, Pirlo's Juve are actually comparing pretty well, right?
No, you're being facetious. Basically, if you remember last season, the hashtag was trending Sarri out. At this point of the season, Sarri had 8 more points than Pirlo does. 2 or 3 seasons ago, Allegri out was trending, and Allegri had 17 plus points on Pirlo at this point of the season. And even critically, there was one in 2016. Juventus had a particularly awful start, and everyone was kind of thinking maybe this is the season where they're going to drop it. But in the end, Allegri came through and won yet another Scudetto. And even in that supposedly abysmal season, Juve had 5 more points than they do right now. So not only is Pirlo not doing well in the table in the sense that he's not top, but also compared to his predecessors, he's not quite there.
Yeah, and I was reading a stat myself today that at this stage of the season, in each of the last 9 campaigns where they did win, they had more points than they do at this stage. So it's not just going back to 2016, it's going right the way back to when this incredible run of form started. So it's not looking good for them.
Yeah, and they've got an important game this weekend as well, probably the second best game of the weekend. They host Lazio in Turin,
who will be well rested.
But they're looking for redemption.
Yeah, of course, Lazio will be well rested, and we should talk about the Torino no-show. Obviously, it was initially reported that there was going to be an automatic 3-0 loss and a 1-point deduction. Seems like this is not the case. Obviously, Torino were forced to, or were advised not to travel by the local health authority due to a COVID outbreak.
Banned from traveling, I believe. I think you were right traveling. In the first case.
Yeah, banned from traveling. I think they were in quarantine. So it sort of begs the question of, you know, we've been through this before with the Napoli Juve game at the start of the season, which point deduction and the automatic loss were rescinded. I mean, is it likely to be the same? It's likely to be the same situation with this game, isn't it? That it will eventually be rescheduled.
It's a whole big pantomime that's going on in front of our eyes, and we all kind of know what's going to happen in the end. In the Napoli case, it was brought up to a different court, and in the end, someone justified that the local health authority has superior authority than some football league. And to add more spice to this whole story, the FIGC and the Lega Calcio are also disagreeing on this situation with putting out contradicting statements. So we all know how this is going to end. The game will be replayed at some point, and there will be more cluster in the schedule, and people will complain about injuries. But this is the kind of season this is, and I don't see any other way of going about it. I think in Italy, everyone is hyper neurotic about cancelling a game, and everyone's thinking about their own point of view. Wait a minute, if Torino don't play 2 games, they'll be fresher for the next game, so maybe they'll beat us and not get relegated. But in other countries, you see that people are like, okay, this is a big external situation, and we just have to all kind of come together. A good example is Everton earlier this season, where the game was called off. There was none of this posturing that happens in Italy.
And Aston Villa as well, it happened with as well. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Buzz. It's a complete farce. We know what I think most people who weren't Juve fans when this situation occurred earlier in the season basically said the same thing. I mean, you've got to do the best that you can in the situation, and the fact is not just that Torino were banned from traveling. The players that were allowed to train individually until some point in the evening of the original date of the match, and then Lega Calcio said, well, we can play it the next day. And you just think, what's the point? You're making a farce of the league anyway if you're asking a team to go into a game having not trained together, just basically having been isolated with a football and doing laps of a pitch or whatever the hell you can do by yourself. I mean, yes, there is obviously going to be fixture congestion, but I raised the point that I raised earlier in the season. Why are we still trying to cram in full football calendars? Why are we insisting
because
on
the
doing
Euros, I guess. I mean, I'm not saying that's justified, but I think that's the way they see it.
But what I mean is, why are we playing the League Cup in England? Why are we playing 2 legs of semi-finals in Serie A? The football calendar has to be looked at as an entirety and has to be prioritized, or had to be. I mean, hopefully everyone will be vaccinated by early on in next season, and we can get back to normality then. But I mean, I think Italian football has taken it to extremes in their hardline interpretation of rules that were made like 2 months into a global pandemic that's gone on for 2 or 3 months into a global pandemic that's gone on for a year now. And instead of kind of being fluid and learning from things that don't work, they've just stuck to a rigid, hard line. I mean, to me, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Just to lighten the mood slightly, and while we're still on Lazio, we should just give a mention to Muriqi, who made his entry into the Gagliardini Challenge I think it was in the last game they played against Bologna, was it?
It was the game against Sampdoria. It was late on in that game. We actually, I think, meant to cover it last week, but had such a packed schedule that we somehow managed to miss it out when it was one of the highlights of the week for me.
Yeah. Anyway, if you haven't seen it, check it out on YouTube.
I think it's a
strong contender.
Number 2 for me right now this season. We have the Living La Vida Loca challenge and this one. These are the 2 big challenges going down.
Yeah, you can never forget the Gagliardini Challenge in the schedule. I don't know how we managed to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, if we were awarding bad week to individuals, he'd probably be up for that award. But we give it only to teams, so it's time for the Good Week, Bad Week awards. For Good Week, the nominations we've obviously spoken about Atalanta, obviously bouncing back from that Madrid loss. Then, as Kenny said, they're on 4 consecutive wins. They won 5-1 in their last game. They're a clear candidate. Inter, obviously top of the league, opened up a bit of a gap. Any other nominations from the panel?
It has to go to Cagliari this week, I think. Does it not?
I just feel justified.
I mean, since Di Francesco's gone, they've picked up two wins. Last week, I was saying, it's looking bad. It's looking like they're beginning to be cut adrift. And now, all of a sudden, with Torino missing 2 games, Cagliari winning 2 games, all of a sudden they're out of the bottom 3. And it looks like we've got a relegation dogfight up ahead again.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's partially Torino have 2 games in hand. Now, obviously, with the one against Lazio being probably postponed, but yeah, 2 wins following the record that they've had. I'm happy to go with Cagliari. So congratulations to them. Good week. Hopefully, they can have a few more good weeks. They might stay in the league. And for bad week, I mean, when you lose 5-1. It's difficult to stay out of the nominations for this one.
It's undeniable. When we did the preseason previews for the free clubs who came up, we kind of mentioned that of all of the free, Crotone were the ones who hadn't really bought anyone functional to their system and also kind of seemed like a thin squad. It's proven right, and if I'm not mistaken, they're on record to break the most goals conceded record for Serie A. They also got rid of Stropa recently, which in my mind is a bit harsh because they're going down no matter what happens. And Stropa has built a rapport with these players for 3 years, and he brought them up to Serie A kind of against the odds. And I think whoever comes in and takes the job, and I think it's Serse Cosmi is taking it for now, they're going to have to contend with a really hard Serie B. And it's not looking great for Crotone after such a triumphant end to last season.
Yeah, and you also have to give a shout out to Fiorentina as well, who have continued on their theme of being awful except for the odd half a football match here or there. But I don't have any complaints against Crotone. I think it's looking very, very dire for them.
Yeah, it gives me no pleasure to award Crotone the Bad Week Award.
And there's always next week for Fiorentina.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, it's the first episode of March, so we bring you our Scudetto. People have been tweeting in questions and sending us questions via WhatsApp and Instagram, and we will now do our best to answer them. So first up is the Tifosi Down Under, who asks, after the early season debate around the starting forwards for the Azzurri, are we any clear as to who will start the Euros, which is now only a few months away? Kenny, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think we're clear. Obviously, there's a big question mark about Zaniolo, when he will return, what state he will be in when he does return. I think looking on current form, Insigne and Immobile worked really well when they last played together for the Azzurri, and I think just given how much Chiesa has emerged at Juve, for me, it's at the moment it's a bit of a no-brainer. You start with Chiesa, Immobile, and Insigne.
Keep big Kevin Lasagna on the bench for a super sub.
Well, on the basis of his Gagliardini challenge a couple of weeks ago, maybe you keep him in Italy.
I'm going to check out the odds for him to win the gold boot. Okay, we got one more from Tifosi Down Under, actually. We can all have a quick stab at this, maybe. So with 25 rounds in the book, who do we think is going to finish top 4 and in what order?
I'm going to take this one first. I think it's going to be Inter, Juve, Milan, and Atalanta.
Disagreements?
I think it's going to be Inter, Milan, Juve probably, and on current form Atalanta. So same 4, but in a slightly different order. I have Milan in second spot. I think they'll.
Yeah, I was going to say
find
that as well. I was going to say the same as you, Kenny, but maybe just for argument's sake, I'll put Roma in there ahead of Atalanta.
Yeah, I don't see enough from Juve at the moment to really suggest that there's going to be any consistency. And I think Milan have had that before. I think it's just a case of things starting to click again. Yeah, they've had problems with Benacer in particular being out, and obviously he's now got COVID, so maybe not. but yeah, I think when he comes back into the fold, when Milan have settled, when Zlatan's back fighting fit, yeah, I think Milan will probably pip Juve to second.
Tifosi, you can tweet us and let us know what your prediction is as well. You don't get away so easily. For the just moving on to the next question, Buzz, this is one for you from Philip. So what do we think of Suning's ceasing of operations at Jiangsu? What does it mean for Inter's prospects? And he speculates can't be good news, surely.
Yeah, this was pretty spectacular news, for me at least. For those who don't know it, Suning, who were the owners of Inter, just cancelled their club, who were the champions in China. They also got rid of the youth team and the women's team. Obviously, China is a completely different political system and kind of social system, and these things might be common out there, but for an owner of a club that's been long-lasting like Inter, that kind of makes you fearful. Since then, Suning have put out statements in support of Inter, and to be fair, they have a 700 million euro investment, so I imagine that they don't want to kind of throw all that away. It doesn't bode well in the long run, but probably for this season, it can create kind of a siege mentality, us against the world, kind of reminiscent of possibly the Azzurri in 2006, where no one gave him a chance and suddenly they took it all. So I think Conte will use it psychologically in the right way. But after this summer, I really don't know what's going to happen. Something that has to be said is that Inter is one of these top 10, 15 clubs in the world, and it's not going to be hard to find a buyer, let's face it.
Yeah, and just the amount of revenue that they generate now compared to where they were even just a few years ago, that they're a very, very attractive proposition. And also it has to be mentioned that the Saudi Arabian Sovereign Wealth Fund has entered into the fray for this as well. I don't think there will be long-term repercussions for Inter. I think there's more likely to be short-term repercussions. They might struggle to finance the sort of moves that Conte wants this summer. But I think Inter are basically going to be a force for years to come.
I wouldn't be surprised if Conte cut ties with Inter at the end of this year, having achieved his one big achievement. He did the same with Chelsea and Juventus, and obviously it depends who the new owners are, but right now he seems intent on ending this season, and then we'll see.
Yeah, and speaking of this summer, Kenny, we've got a question from Hector. He said that he heard that Spurs might be signing Mikkel Damsgaard of Sampdoria, and he wants to know if he's any good.
Well, I mean, he's a scorer of some great goals. No, but yeah, very, very useful player. I haven't had that much of an opportunity to see that many Sampdoria games in their entirety this season, but he's one of those players who they just kind of catch your attention, and whether that means that he kind of has kind of floats in and out of games, or is just always around, I couldn't say, but I've seen him score some absolute crackers. So I think Spurs fans probably in for some fun if that does go through.
Yeah, a Dele Alli-esque volley that he's scored. Check out on his YouTube highlights. We've got a couple of questions from Milan Obsession. Maybe I think I need to take the first one. It's, what is the government of the podcast? She says she thought it was democratic, but has noticed that despite Milan being top of the table for half the season, Boaz has always been reined in. Atalanta get one bad call, and Kenny pulls a Conte-like angry rant. I mean, obviously, the podcast is not a democracy; it's a dictatorship, and what I say goes. So that really answers that one. But I've got another question for you, though. No, we're not going to take any other answers on this one, actually.
To be fair, Kenny's rant about Remo Freuler's sending off, at the time, he made a lot of sense. Since we had the pod, I went back and watched it, and to be honest, the red card was definitely harsh, but I've seen those given, so I understand why it may have been given, although to give that kind of advantage to a team like Real Madrid is a little bit criminal for the narrative. But yeah, Kenny went off and won, but I love it when Kenny does that.
I'm going to try not to take the bait on this and just point to the time in the match where the incident happened, the position the ball was moving to, and whether that constituted a clear goal scoring opportunity. And I'm gonna leave it there. The only other thing that I'm gonna say is that the number of honourable mentions that Zlatan Ibrahimovic has received and the number of dishonourable mentions that Conte has received perhaps disprove that argument of a reining in of Milan bias on Scudetto Pod.
Okay. Yeah, we've said too much. We will answer one other question from Milan Obsession, though. This is your opportunity to talk about Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Zlatan mentioned that changing the format of the Sanremo festival to a football format would be a good idea. Do you think that would improve the interest in the festival for those outside of Italy? And also, as a sub-question, how fast would VGC ruin that?
The VGC would probably ruin it within a matter of days, unfortunately, but it's already kind of, excuse my French, but it's a fucked up spectacle as it is, so there's not much to ruin, but at the same time, it's a really splendidly weird concept. I don't think people outside of Italy will ever quite get it, but it's kind of like Eurovision on steroids. And a scoop that I have for Scudetto listeners is that Zlatan, who showed up, he's showing up for 4 of the 6 nights, I believe. But today he was due to arrive for his usual segment, and apparently there was a really bad car crash on the highway on the way to the Sanremo, and Zlatan was stuck in traffic, so he jumped out of his car and he hitched a ride with some dude on a motorbike to get 60 kilometers in Sanremo, and apparently he did it in a very quick time. I'm not saying he was speeding or anything, but he may have been speeding. And so Zlatan is top quality, and Sanremo is part of Italy. Fantastic stuff.
All right. Well, while we're on Zlatan, we've got a question from Ori. And Kenny, you can take this because you engage with it on Twitter. If Zlatan faced Muhammad Ali in the ring, who would win?
I'm just going to give the same answer that I gave on Twitter. On the basis of Zlatan's stand-up performance at Sanremo, I think he'd be sitting down within 10 seconds if he got into a ring with Ali.
I think this question is a little bit more complicated because maybe he means current Muhammad Ali, in which case Zlatan would definitely win.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Ori has also asked us if Juve will challenge for the title or if Inter will run away with it. I think we've covered that one. We've got a couple of questions from Viola Club Israel. This one applies to all of us and probably all of football fans everywhere. Why do we watch Calcio if our teams are always disappointing us?
Only one team can win. So by definition, why would anyone support anyone other than Man City, Bayern Munich, PSG, Juve? I don't know. I don't know why we don't. It's the dream. It's the dream that we keep alive.
We enjoy the glorious defeats as much as the victories.
Football is a metaphor for life. You sit around and wait for something to happen that won't happen for a long, long time, and a lot of crap goes by, and then all of a sudden there's this jolt, and you're like, wow, I'm loving this, and then it all goes back to being crap, and you're just waiting for that next jolt.
Buzz, this is definitely one for you. Who's your favorite Serie A club social media team?
I've got an honorable mention later for social media, but for me, social media wise in Italy, the number one team is Roma easily. The way they show the goals with these really cool graphics works a wonder. The way they interact with fans is really cool, but my favorite part is that when they're doing their summer transfers during the transfer window, when they're presenting players, they show videos of missing people around the world, and apparently quite a few of these people have been found via these videos. So again, this is they're using their voice for a real positive reason, and it works. As I said, they're the best at it for me, and their English language account was one of the first ones, and you can see it.
Yeah, agreed. Definitely agreed on that point. We've got another question from Sigmund. I think we've answered this one actually, but he's asking about the verdict on Pirlo's season and how it compares. Whereas I think you gave some detail on that one already.
I'll be real brief, and I mean, again, I find it weird that fans were on Allegri and Sarri's back despite the teams winning in the end, whereas Pirlo is kind of being given time. Having said that, I'm a big fan of Pirlo the man and Pirlo the player, and at times this year we've seen his vision. It's just a matter of getting a few results on the trot.
Yeah, I would say that what I said at the start of the season was that I have no doubt that he will become a very, very good manager. This was a very, very bold move for him. It could still work out. It appears he is being given time, but who knows? The verdict on his season so far is that it's not been great, but I don't think you could have expected it to be, given that he had never managed any level before. He had 5 days or something as Juve Primavera manager. So yeah, not a great season so far. They could yet come out winning it though. So maybe ask us again.
Yeah, exactly. And the last question comes from Liz, which was more of a task than a question, but to name our best squad consisting of one player from each Serie A outfit. During the pre-production meeting, we got into an argument about this. So we're going to take an extra week to give you our final answer. Really enjoyed talking about it, but I think you could almost give it its own episode. So we'll try and get back to you on that one, Liz.
Maybe listeners want to give it a go as well.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe we can have a little section on it next week if we get a few responses. So without further ado, we'll go on to the honourables and dishonourable mentions section. Take it away, Boaz.
Yeah, I wanted to give an honourable mention to Paul Gascoigne, who is one of the contestants on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, the Italy edition, with a bunch of YouTubers and showgirls and really like B-rate celebrities. And this player who's played a semi-final of a World Cup, apparently his rider, he requested a fishing rod and 2 cans of lager.
And Kenny, you alluded to this one earlier, but give us the detail on Gasparini's comments on Ilicic.
So basically he said that Ilicic had a very high level of performance, a very good performance. If he kind of trains consistently at a high level and doesn't behave like a grandmother, then that's when I'll call him the professor. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, supposedly he behaves like a grandmother because he complains about being tired all the time. I think that's the analogy. I don't know too much about the characteristics of Italian grandmas, but I think that's what it is. Buzz, what was the social media one that you previewed?
So I'm almost going to give a dishonorable mention to Genoa, the team, for not fielding 6 starters in their game against top of the table Inter at San Siro because they were playing the derby. Keen listeners may have noticed we didn't mention the Genova derby at all in this episode because it was a boring game and not worth mentioning. So almost dishonorable, but I have to give an honorable mention to whoever is running whoever the admin of the Genoa English account is, because they were kind of given a real emotional breakdown of Inter's second goal, and they're just too good for us right now. That's why they're top of the table. Like a lot of poetic liberty there.
Okay, one more honourable and one more dishonourable each. Kenny, you've got one for Sansone's goal.
Yeah, Sansone's goal against Lazio. Just well, for starters, a really wonderful move that included a lovely lofted through ball. Musa Barrow pulled back, great cross into a really dangerous area. But then Sansone does some Zlatan Ibrahimovic style acrobatics, perfect technique, wonderful volley, top corner, unstoppable. Check it out on YouTube.
And Buzz, your last honourable.
Bernardeschi often gets a lot of slack by us, by Twitter, by a lot of Juventus fans. But in their game against Spezia, he came on in the 60th minute and he turned the game. He set up one of the goals. He was influential in one of the other goals. And all around, this was the performance, the reason why Juventus signed him from Fiorentina in the first place. I hope he returns because he played quite well for the Azzurri in the few occasions that he did. And he seems like a player that's getting ruined at Juventus right now.
Yep, and with that, we move on to the dishonourables. Kenny, you've got one for Koulibaly.
Yeah, so this is for Koulibaly in the Napoli-Benevento game at the weekend, which Napoli actually won 2-0. But Napoli were 2-0 up, and then an unfortunate chain of events happened. First of all, the ball fell to Koulibaly, who did not even have to jump to meet the ball with his head about 5 yards out of goal. Center of the goal, somehow managed to put the ball past the post, and then minutes later, already being on a yellow card with Napoli 2-0 up and 10 minutes to go in the Benevento half, decided to absolutely put in a crunching tackle, got himself a second yellow card and a sending off, and I just want to know why.
It wasn't even really a tackle, was it? I mean,
no, it was just a lunge.
Just a lunge into the back of his knees. Surprisingly, Gattuso didn't look too irritated with him, sort of slapping him on the back at the end. Anyway, Buzz, your last dishonourable.
This might be an unpopular opinion since the whole of Calcio Twitter and a lot of fans have been really excited about this Netflix Roberto Baggio biopic that the trailer came out recently. Personally, I think it looks awful. It makes A Shot of Glory starring Ali McCoy look like The Godfather or something. Football films rarely work because the way the action happens is just doesn't translate to people recreating it. And the shot of Donadoni playing Baggio through in the through ball, it just looks like a five-a-side game my son was playing. So for me, it's a definite dishonorable, and this movie is going to be rubbish. Anyone who has any hopes that it's going to be good is really delusional.
Spoiler alert, he misses the penalty at the end.
Yeah, the whole trailer is based around this penalty. We all know what's happened. We know this guy. And honestly, the actor they picked looks nothing like him. You can't just stick someone, like give him a fancy wig and he's Roberto Baggio. Come on.
But I believe that Arrigo Sacchi does look very much like James Richardson. So there's that to look forward to.
And the accent's all wrong.
That'd be an excellent biopic.
I mean, I'm going to watch it, but it's going to be Car Crash TV.
Good stuff. All right, that definitely is all we've got time for this week. If you don't already, please subscribe to our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your audio. We'll speak to you next week. Until then, enjoy the football.
Che sta decretando lo scudetto del Milan in questo preciso istante. La Juventus è campione d'Italia. Questa data, il 6 maggio. Punto di anticipo, la Roma è campione d'Italia per la stagione 2000-2001.